In our last session, we talked about that one of the sources for the Unitarian Universalist tradition is the world religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Today, we're going to talk about another source for our tradition, and that is humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. In our last session, we talked about how the transcendentalists discovered the world's religions. And one of the religions they discovered was Buddhism. And Buddhism, strictly speaking, is a non-theistic religion. You might believe in God and be a Buddhist, but it's not required. It's not obligatory, and it's not mandatory. Buddha preferred to put his emphasis on something different. He said human beings are too often like a man who's been shot by an arrow, and the man says, before I remove this arrow, I need to know what bird produced the feathers on this arrow, and before I remove it, I really should know what tree produced the wood that made the shaft of this arrow, and I ought to know where they mined the metal that created the spear for this arrow. I should have answers to these questions. He says human beings too often ask questions like that instead of simply removing the arrow. So the focus in humanism is not on abstract metaphysical issues, but on removing the causes of suffering, to stop asking these abstract theological questions and take practical action to remove tangible causes of suffering that are in the world. The Buddha also affirmed the use of reason. He said we should be like gold miners who burn and rub and test the metals that they produce. He said, my teachings should be like that. My teachings, you should test them instead of accepting them out of reverence for me. So instead of just reverence for the teacher, test and question and discern whether something is true for yourself. Reason being like a refining fire that purifies thought. This is very similar to the idea that William Ellery Channing did in his sermon that started the Unitarian Church, which is the text from Thessalonians. Prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. This idea of reason as a refining fire. Now, one of the other things that humanism teaches is science as a source of inspiration. We can think of science as a useful tool for discerning what the facts are, and religion as a source for discerning what are the right values to bring to these facts. That's one way to look at it. But another way to think about it is science also offers inspiration. And I know in my own spiritual journey, one of the things I find very inspiring are the images we see that come back to Earth from the Hubble telescope. I see all these images that come from different parts of the universe, all the color and variety and light, and it seems to me more sacred than any stained glass window. There's something that inspires reverence and awe. And I think that's an important part of humanism, to find reverence and awe in the natural world and through scientific discovery. There was a member of this church, Victor Hobday, who loved to talk about the Big Bang theory of the universe when he was living. He's no longer alive, but he loved to talk about it. And I remember one time I went to see him in the hospital, and he was experienced a very painful health condition. And we just started talking about the Big Bang theory of the universe, and all of a sudden you could tell he just forgot his pain. There was something about immersing himself in the universe and talking about the big picture of things that just totally made him self-forgetful. And it made me realize that, I'd never thought about the Big Bang theory of the universe as pastoral care. But it can be. To lose ourselves in an infinite universe and reflecting on science has spiritual benefit and not just scientific benefit. Now, to fundamentalists, humanism is the denial of God, and that's about as far as they go with it. More accurately, we can say that humanism is the affirmation of humanity. If God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, we human beings aren't. We are not omnipotent. We are not all powerful. We are not omniscient. We're not all knowing. We are not omnipresent. We can't be everywhere all the time. We aren't eternal. This is not a quality that we possess. We are not infinite. In fact, it is the brevity of life that makes it more meaningful. The idea that we have this short time to live upon the earth, that is part of what makes it sacred to us. So if we take a humanistic perspective, there are many varieties of humanism, but one of the things that they have in common is to say that the goal of religion is not to make us a good Buddhist or a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good Jew. The goal of religion should be to make us a good human being. That's the important role that it plays in our lives. So humanism warns us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. So what do we mean by idolatry? Well, the Hebrew tradition teaches us that we shouldn't bow down before idols. We shouldn't bow down before a statue, because if we do, we are greater than the thing we worship. And so humanism also says, don't worship things. You're greater than objects. You're greater than these things you worship. So affirm your humanity rather than deifying things. Don't deify a nation. Don't deify the economy. Don't deify technology. Don't deify material possessions. Do not deify things, but instead appreciate people. Another one of the religions that the Transcendentalists studied was Confucianism. And Confucius said we should start with earth and then work our way to heaven. In terms of our theological reflection, we should start with earth and work our way to heaven. And so it is with humanism. We should start with people. We should start with human beings. And the goal of religion is not to be a saint or even a sage. The goal of religion is simply to be better human beings.